We all love French fries, don't we? Well, at least I do. I often enjoy them as a snack when I feel hungry. But it feels kind of strange to call them French fries when they feel so American. What part of it is ever related to France? Today, we're going to unpack the long history of French fries, where they actually came from, how they got their American frame, and finally, its modern variations right here in South Korea. To break down this story, we have to look closely at our core concept. While the United States undoubtedly popularized the fry as a global corporate icon, the foundational DNA of this cooking method is deeply rooted in European working-class street culture. Furthermore, we will analyze a fascinating secondary loop: how this newly Americanized export bounced back across the Pacific Rim to interact with contemporary Korean trends. But before we can examine the modern drive-thru or global supply chains, we have to travel much further back in time. To maintain true historical accuracy, we must recognize that before the fry was ever contested in Europe, the potato itself had an entirely different indigenous beginning. Before we can even begin talking about slicing or deep frying, we must give proper historical credit to the true roots of this crop. The potato did not originate in Europe. It was originally domesticated thousands of years ago by indigenous communities in the high-altitude Andean region of South America, primarily modern-day Peru and Bolivia. For generations, Incan and pre-Incan civilizations perfected the agricultural technique required to cultivate hundreds of unique potato varieties. It wasn't until the Spanish conquests in the 16th century that the potato crossed the Atlantic Ocean. When potatoes first arrived on European shores, it had to face intensive opposition from the European people, often viewed as an exotic, dangerous plant rather than an edible source of nutrition. It took nearly 2 centuries of agricultural adaptation, selective breeding, and royal promotion for it to evolve into a daily food crop. By the late 18th century, however, it had become the center of a fierce culinary conflict between Belgium and France. Let's first take a look at the widely cited Belgian perspective. There is a famous Belgian legend stating that fries date back to the late 1600s. A local writer named Joe Gerald made this story popular in the 20th century. The story claims that poor inhabitants living along the Meuse River near the regions of Namur and Denain used to catch tiny fish from the river and fry them as a primary source of protein. The legend goes on to state that when the river completely froze, during particularly harsh, unforgiving winters, the villagers would cut potatoes into the shape of a small fish and deep fry them instead. This narrative is frequently used in modern Belgium to claim historical ownership over what they proudly call frites. However, modern food historians heavily caution against taking this regional folklore as absolute, verified fact. Prominent culinary historians, including Belgium's Pierre Leclerc, challenged this river legend by noting that cooking fat and oils were expensive luxuries in the late 1600s, far out of reach for poor peasants. They also questioned whether potatoes were even common in that valley back then, as regional records suggest a much later adoption. Instead, another influential argument points to Paris near the Pont Neuf Bridge in the late 1780s, where street vendors sold a popular working-class snack called Pont Neuf, frying them openly in large cauldrons. The origin of the fry's English name is equally debated. The most famous story claims that American soldiers stationed in Europe during World War I were introduced to the snack by Allies. According to this rumor, because the Belgian army spoke French, the soldiers nicknamed the crisp potatoes French fries. However, many historians treat this explanation cautiously, as the timeline remains completely unverified by military logs or letters. Instead, The historical trail points to a gradual linguistic crossover. Thomas Jefferson is known to be related to an 1802 manuscript requesting potatoes fried raw in small slices, a style he encountered as a minister in France. Over the decades, subsequent American culinary usage helped popularize the term. Ultimately, while the exact origin remains a dispute, the fry's next major transformation happened in the United States. Once the concept of the fried potato became established in the United States during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, American consumer culture did exactly what it does best. It scaled up, standardized, and thoroughly industrialized the entire process. In the early decades of the 1900s, French fries were still primarily an artisanal, made-from-scratch menu found in local diners and urban steakhouses. Each batch typically required kitchen staff to manually wash, peel, slice, and fry the potatoes by hand. This culinary method was incredibly labor-intensive, time-consuming, and resulted in significant inconsistencies in texture, taste, and quality from one day to the next. However, the post-World War II economic boom completely altered the American dining. This change generated an intense consumer demand for unprecedented speed, absolute uniformity, and maximum convenience. To meet this massive shift, American food scientists and industrial agriculture stepped in to transform the old ways into hyper-efficient factory work. According to Eric Schlosser's Fast Food Nation, a major turning point in the American fast food industry occurred when Idaho entrepreneur J.R. Simplot helped commercialize frozen French fries, leading major chains such as McDonald's to adopt them in the 1960s. Before this shift, individual restaurants peeled and cut potatoes on site, a process requiring intensive local labor. By integrating frozen potato technology into the supply chain, the fast food industry largely centralized early food preparation away from the local kitchen. This shift allowed companies to reduce in-store labor costs, ensure a steady year-round supply, and standardize quality across thousands of expanding locations. The resulting demand for uniform raw materials significantly transformed regional agriculture, strengthening the dominance of the russet Burbank potato variety across Idaho and the Pacific Northwest. Food scientists and large-scale processors carefully controlled variables such as moisture, starch, and sugar content so that fries would cook with consistent taste and texture, regardless of where they were served. What had once been a straightforward food became a highly engineered industrial product at the center of the modern fast food supply chain. As we study intercultural dynamics, it is important to remember that cultural exchange is rarely one-directed. It operates as a complex loop. Once the United States globalized the standardized frozen French fries in the late 20th century, the corporate export began interacting dynamically around the globe. Instead of keeping the fry as a foreign food, Korean street food vendors completely reassembled the American format and fused it with traditional night market snacking templates. The most representative example is the kamja hot dog, a popular street food consisting of a deep-fried corn dog on a skewer coated in diced French fry cubes. This represents an example of an evolutionary loop. A root crop originally domesticated by indigenous communities in South America was adapted into an artisanal street snack of Europe, transformed by the American industry, exported globally across oceans, and then completely reimagined by Korean innovators to fit local street food culture. So, what is the ultimate takeaway of this cultural journey? The complex history of the French fry serves as a powerful case study, proving that culture is never static, isolated, or one-dimensional. It highlights how ordinary items often reflect complex histories of global exchange.